Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are entering the combat zone. I'm Joseph, and he's Nick.
That would be me.
That would be Nick. Is your microphone on, Nick?
It better be. I'm using it.
Okay. I was just leaning over, closing the door here, because I forgot to close the door.
You got to seal the bunker, man, when we go into the combat zone.
Yeah, I still haven't memorized that phrase. What's the phrase you use?
The combat zone, where the enemy only has three things to say. Abandon ship, bail out, and take cover.
Okay. Well, we have a fun show for you guys tonight. There's so much to talk about. Supreme Court justice nominees in the United States, NATO conference in Europe, here in Canada and Ontario, the government finally getting rid of that crazy board of directors running the Ontario Hydro.
Why you should never take your car to Walmart if you don't know the difference between an Infiniti and a Nissan.
Right, there's that. And we've got stupid politicians this week. We've got some great talk about the media and
buying Canadian.
Buy Canadian, right. Oh, yeah. Gee, I forgot all about that. Trade talk and everything.
Yep.
So our number to call if you want to join in the conversation.
I got it right here. I got her. 844-415-2115.
See, I knew that one by heart.
I know you do. 415-2115.
Did you post the right number this week on Facebook?
Of course not. I don't want anybody to actually call.
No, seriously.
Of course I did, yes.
Yeah, we don't get many calls, but that's okay. We get a lot of people giving us feedback during the week, so that's good. And if you're on the website and you take a look at that player, if you want to chat during the call, during the call.
We want you to chat during the call.
We definitely want you to chat during the call if you call in, for sure. But if you want to chat during the broadcast, you could do that in real time by clicking on the little talk bubble in the player. So away we go, Nick.
We have, I think, one of the best prize packages for the first person into the combat zone chat room, and that is an all-expenses-paid trip to Disneyland with all your kids. The only requirement is you pay for the whole thing yourself.
Yeah, you better be careful with those promises there, Nick, because this is what, it's so easy now to do audio and video editing right on your computer. So what will happen is somebody's recording this, or they're going to download it, a week from now, and they're going to edit it, and then they're going to come and try to claim that prize. And I'm giving people some ideas out there, right?
Yeah, thanks, Joseph.
And
it's a joke, folks. I wasn't kidding.
Then they're going to claim that we edited these parts, these disclaimers in
later. Yeah,
yeah. So always have to be careful. And you can I know our listeners have a relatively higher IQ than many other people do.
But you never know.
You never know. So some people out there might take it seriously. Anyway, once again, the number to call if you want to call and join in the conversation by phone, toll-free anywhere in North America, 844-415-2115. And I'm not reading that from the big sign that Nick put up so that he could remember
next
it
week I'm going to put it in neon and make it flash.
And by the way, I do have this week, last week, 2 weeks ago, I promised that we would play this clip from Yes Prime Minister. Pardon me, guys.
Is it Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister?
I think it's Yes Prime Minister, but I'm not 100% sure.
Either way, it's
the same crew. It's the same show. Just right. It was the sequel to Yes Prime Minister was the sequel. Talking about polls and how polls could be manipulated. And so we have that clip for you later on as well in the second hour. So, Nick, why don't you kick off? And by the way, anything you guys want to talk about, so send us a message or whatever if you want to.
You can even call us at 844-415-2115. We have that technical capability.
And by the way, for those of you, I just want to point out that Nick is a total Facebook addict, in case you hadn't noticed. So while I'm here looking after the engineering of the show, etc., he's totally obsessed, sitting across from me with his laptop open, staring at Facebook. So don't forget to leave comments on Facebook also.
I'm just connected with the fans.
I get it.
I want to maintain that relationship.
Okay, so I'll let you take over, Nick.
All right.
I've occupied enough time here.
Let's start with this whole idea of Rob Ford. Now, he didn't actually fire the guy. But the $6 million man is gone. And that, of course, is Mayo Schmidt, who resigned today and he's not getting his $10 million golden parachute. And one of the Facebook contributors said he shouldn't get a golden parachute. He should get a windmill on his front lawn. I think it's a brilliant idea. I mean, so what if it costs us $2 million to install it? The justice would be worth it.
Now, just to clarify, Nick, this fellow, what was his name again?
Mayo Schmidt.
Mayo?
Mayo Schmidt.
Mayo, like in Mayo
Mayonnaise,
Clinic?
but without the nays. It's like tomato without the t.
Right. That was a Lou Gossett Jr. joke in, what was the movie? Richard Gere. When Richard Gere was training to become a fighter pilot. He was in basic training in the Navy. He wanted to become a Navy pilot. So he was in basic training. On Officer and a Gentleman. That was
you are going back away.
Yeah, that is that's more than 30. That's like 35 years ago or something like that.
I don't think I've ever seen that one.
Anyways, it's an interesting movie, but Lou Gossett Jr. is the gunny. He's the drill sergeant that's training these guys during basic training. And, he comes up with a nickname for people. So there was this, Mexican guy or Hispanic recruit, and I can't remember what his name was, Mayo somewhere or other, and that was the joke. He called him mayonnaise the whole way through.
Okay. No, that
was a little off topic.
Yeah,
just a little straying a little bit.
Let's pull this back to...
Okay, so just explain to people, this guy, just so that everybody understands, was the chairman of the board of Hydro One.
Yeah,
in
he was
Ontario,
the chief executive officer.
Okay.
His salary this year was $6 million. 2 years ago, and I'm going by memory now, but it was $3 million. He had an increase of $3 million to the current 6 and negotiated a package for himself that if he was ever terminated, he would get an extra $10 million. So Ford came along.
It's a good gig if you can get it.
Oh, yeah. No kidding. Like, I'd have taken it too. But the point is that the thing with Crown corporations is it kind of exists in this nebulous world. They're not a private company, but they're not fully owned by the Crown either. They're kind of somewhere in gray no man's land.
Yeah, no, the government, this wasn't actually a Crown corporation. Hydro One, I think the Liberal government
sold out 49% of it.
A certain number of shares in it.
Yeah, that's the point. There's somewhere it's not wholly owned by the government like it used to be, but it's not wholly owned by the private sector either. Because in the private sector, you can pay your CEO whatever you want to. If he's not performing, you fire him.
Right.
But here, because it's this nebulous cloud between somewhere out there in no man's land, he had pretty much the rules were thrown out the window. And Doug Ford said, enough of that. We're going to get rid of this. And he did.
Well, it was pretty clear that the whole hydro scenario in Ontario was badly run.
No question.
And I don't know whether you could put all of the blame on the government or all of the blame on the board and the executives. I think a combination of the two probably. But clearly with the new government coming in under Doug Ford, they clearly had to clean house. And this is just the start. There are a number of, I don't think the public really appreciates how many boards that there are at commissions and agencies that
thousands.
Are quasi-government and in Ontario. And it's not just in Ontario. This is something that's really a function of modern democratic government now, where the government doesn't want to have to get tied up in all of the administrative stuff, so they sort of take the legislative stuff and move it into agencies. So you have administrative tribunals, etc. Things are not adjudicated in regular courts now in many instances, etc., etc., etc. So anyway, I'll let you get back onto it, Nick.
Well, basically, the rest of this, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story is that it's not just the chief executive officer that is going, the $6 million man, but between now and August 15th, they're going to replace the whole board one at a time. So as they get rid of one, they'll put another one. So it's not like you're firing the whole board and the ship goes rudderless. Not that it would matter because it was headed for the cliffs anyway. But they're going to make the transition rapidly but smoothly from one, and they're going to dramatically reduce. We don't know how much these guys are going to get paid, but you can bet it's not going to be $6 million a year. Just by comparison, the head of the Quebec Power Corporation, whatever they call it, Quebec Power, whatever it is, makes $400,000 a year. So something along that line, because I am not against paying good people for high-end jobs, like jobs that carry a lot of stress, jobs that require a certain amount of skill sets. Like you don't pay a thoracic surgeon, okay? You don't pay him, $8,000 a month. He gets a lot more than that.
Well, maybe you do pay him $8,000 a month, but whatever the market is paying people, I always tell people the right price or the right wage is whatever people are willing to pay for it.
Hey, you're absolutely right.
End of story, full stop.
But ask yourself this question. If you're laying on the table and there's a guy standing over you with a scalpel in his hand who's going to give you a triple bypass or angioplasty or something like that to save your life, do you want him very well paid, happy at home, and stress-free?
I think that in that circumstance, the way you've just set up the scenario,
right?
I think that doctor is going to be paid well.
Of course.
Okay? Because he's a doctor, he's a surgeon, he's a
very highly specialized.
He's highly educated, etc.
Right.
But I don't care ultimately what he's getting paid because he's getting paid whatever the market is willing to pay him, and he's doing the job because he's willing to do it at that level of pay.
Right.
That's the way the private sector is supposed to work. Now, of course, the problem with the scenario, the way I've just described it is I'm describing a private sector relationship.
Right.
But in Ontario and in most of Canada, in fact, all of Canada, healthcare is a single-payer type of system. There's no hybrid system. So we actually don't have private surgery, at least not private thoracic surgery. We might have private laser surgery for your eyes or private cosmetic surgery. But when it comes to the actual health of people, then we care and we get into this whole debate because the doctors are actually being paid by taxpayers.
Right.
So now we're wondering, okay, is that doctor really going to be satisfied? It just introduces an element of.
So would you? And I'm not necessarily opposed to this. I think this is, to me at least, a natural extension of the kind of things you're talking about, to completely privatize Hydro One and let it compete with other players, as long as you're willing to allow other providers into the marketplace who are willing to generate and produce power and compete with Hydro One.
Well, the problem, okay, this is a great question. And as a general rule, I don't like the government owning or regulating, frankly, anything, okay? I mean, maybe I shouldn't be going that far. Obviously, we have to have laws, and obviously we have to have some regulation.
Yeah, we're not for anarchy or tyranny.
Okay, we're not. As I like to say, I'm a conservative, not a libertarian, right?
Right.
Okay, so that's fine. But I don't think you're comparing apples and oranges in this case, because when it comes to hydro, you have the problem of distribution. And so somebody has to own and operate and maintain the distribution system. And you only have one distribution system. Now, when it comes to natural gas, we've pretty much worked all of that out.
Right.
So it is possible to have a non-government owned entity or private sector, an entirely private sector, providing those services and maintaining the distribution system, etc. The question is, to what degree do you regulate it? I don't know. It's an open question for me. I find that the hydro system and the utilities in general are more complicated when it comes to the question of private versus state or public ownership. I hate calling it public ownership because, they like to say, oh, the public owns it, okay? But when was the last time that you were consulted about the way that a publicly owned quote-unquote
Yeah, that's another nebulous term they throw around.
I know, and this is the other thing about it. Just let me get this off my chest, Nick, okay? When people go, oh, well, it's got to be publics because it's not right to make a profit, okay? And I go, okay, well, what about those CEOs and public corporations or not-for-profit corporations that are getting paid mega dollars, okay? So it doesn't matter to me whether you're getting paid as a bonus from a share capital type of corporation, or you're not making a profit, quote unquote, because you're a not for profit and you're a charity. Okay, but you're still making the same amount of money. The only difference is you're making it as a salary as opposed to a dividend or something like that. So all of this stuff about private versus public ownership is a bit of a fraud, okay? I'm not sure we want to go all the way down that rabbit hole, but it's not the way that people automatically assume it is, okay?
Well, the thing that crosses my mind is when I hear this stuff, I'm reminded of the original mandate of what was then Ontario Hydro. When they first turned on the water over at Niagara Falls in 1900 or 1901.
Whatever it was.
Yeah, when Tesla helped them.
I'm not even sure that it was. I don't even know if it was for sure Niagara Falls, but was it?
I think it was. Okay. I think that's where the first generation station was.
Okay.
Anyway, when they first turned the lights on there and got those big turbines running, the mandate was they were going to produce power at the cost of what it cost to actually make it. So in other words, they weren't going to make any money on it. It was a benefit. Cheap power was a benefit that all the people of Ontario would enjoy, and all the industry and everything to give us a competitive edge. That's long since been forgotten. Now it's all about, if you doubt me, just look at your power bill sometime. Like, what the hell is a globalization fee? Or a line loss or a distribution cost. I mean, this is not operating at the cost of what it takes to run the power company.
Right.
And then you get $6 million going out the window to a guy, who's kind of rhymes with, you think of a sandwich when you think of his name.
Yeah.
So the point is, there's something been lost along the way, and I don't know if we'll ever get that back, but we certainly could work towards it.
Now, I want to just go back for a second to healthcare.
Okay.
Because we didn't intend to talk about healthcare, but just on the question that you raised about private
Since it came up,
right, private versus public. I actually am a very strong proponent of private healthcare. I don't believe in public healthcare. I do not believe that the government bureaucracy is better suited or better qualified to run hospitals and doctors' offices than they are to run the car business, okay, the used car lots. And maybe some government people really should be running used car businesses. I don't know, okay? I that was a poor joke. Somewhere in there was something humorous that got lost as it was coming out. Anyway, the point I'm making is, look, first of all, your doctor's office, your whether you go to a clinic or it's just a doctor, okay, is actually a private corporation. Frontline Healthcare is almost entirely private in Ontario and across the country, okay, in terms of the delivery of services. And I think you can run hospitals that way as well. You could separate. I think we've had this conversation before in a previous episode.
Perhaps.
You could separate insurance from the delivery of the service. And the problem with the way it's set up now is that if you have a single payer, which is the government, and you remove the cost of the consumption from the consumer, okay, then let's face facts, healthcare is a consumer product.
Right, it's
okay?
a service.
And patients are healthcare consumers.
Right.
So there's nothing dirty about that. That's just the way it is. So if you remove the cost entirely of the service to the consumer, the cost of consumption, then there's absolutely nothing that you can do. There's nothing to control the prices except for regulation. And the problem, of course, is once you start regulating the prices, then you're creating more and more shortages. So in a kind of an ironic way, almost paradoxically, if you don't understand the economics of it, the reason that we have such upward inflationary pressure on cost of healthcare, which is ostensibly forcing the government to step in and control it more and more and more, to the point where they're always looking now for services, for types of surgery and things like that, to delist, to not cover anymore under the public insurance program.
Because it's too expensive.
Because it's too expensive. Okay. So ironically, it's exactly the way we're trying to keep the costs down that's driving the costs up.
Just let me jump. I want to throw in a comment that Marin made when we were talking about hydro. She says, as I understand it, globalization fee was the loss they take in selling the excess. Well, if we weren't overproducing, we wouldn't have to sell to Vermont. I remember Bob Shirelli talking about how they made $200 million on hydro that cost them $1 billion to create. That's an $800 billion loss. $800 million loss.
So what you guys are telling me is, because I confess, my wife pays the bills, and our hydro bills. By the way, we're living in the city. Nick, you're living outside of the city, so we have Ottawa Hydro,
right,
and you're Hydro One, right?
Right.
And there's actually a significant difference. Our hydro bills are actually fairly under control and fairly low. At least we think they are, because we pay somewhere around $100, a little less than $100 a month, and we think that's a little on the high side. But it's interesting because I was talking to a friend the other day who's living in Barrhaven, about 5 or 6 kilometers from here, in a relatively the same kind of garden home that we live in, and he was telling me that he pays somewhere around $50 or $60 a month. So the costs are not bad.
Well, right now, but part of the reason for that, though, is Kathleen Wynne's borrowing of $5 billion to suppress the price of hydro artificially until after the next election.
Okay, so I'm confused. And you're not confusing me. I'm confused with the whole policy area, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only person that's confused, okay? I don't understand why taxpayers in Ontario, or I should say hydro consumers in Ontario, which is virtually everybody that owns property, okay?
Right.
And not only that, I mean, also renters, I guess, now, because it's not unusual to have separate hydro metering for separate apartments in apartment buildings.
That's right.
That's not unusual anymore. Or that's not unusual now. At one point it was. But so what you're telling me is, or what Marin seems to be saying, is that consumers are actually subsidizing the sale. In other words, that Hydro One is selling power to foreign governments at less than it costs to produce.
That's right.
And it's Ontario consumers who are covering the loss.
Yes.
Okay, in what universe does that even make sense?
In the liberal universe.
So you're doing that, and then the cost of hydro goes through the roof. So you go out and you borrow more money to reduce the cost of hydro to the consumer. You see, this is, and I'm sure there's something in the equation that I'm missing. I just don't know what it is, and this is just a good example of how messed up and broken and complicated everything has become with this file.
This is why I don't envy the Tories taking over at Queen's Park. They have a dog's breakfast to clean up down there.
On this file, 100% for sure.
Well, I doubt this is the only file, but this is certainly the biggest one, the thickest one. That's going to take the most and maybe cause people a lot of pain financially to sort it out. And so that's one issue. I want to go back to the discussion on healthcare for just a second, because on Facebook, it was either earlier today or yesterday, there was a conversation around a doctor. And I think you sent me the link about this, about the doctor in England who got sacked because he wouldn't stop saying that transgenderism, there's only 2 genders, okay? You're born male or female, okay? And because he would not stop saying that, they sacked him in favor of this politically correct transgenderism idea. Now, that's not the point of my discussion. I don't want to go there. But it spawned a whole conversation about how people talked about, I think religion and politics should be always separate. And somebody made the comment, if religions want to build schools and hospitals and all that, fine, let them. And somebody said, well, who do you think built the first hospitals? So with all that said, if you go back, like Pembroke used to have 4 hospitals, all of them privately funded and run, staffed, and put out there through donations, okay? And I think other than the advances in technology that science and medicine have brought us in the last 100 years or 120 years, we're actually worse off now than we were then, because you don't have as many choices in the marketplace, costs are out through the roof, and all for many of the reasons you've already articulated. But this idea that the government is the only one who can do these things is one of the hardest nuts to crack, because there's a whole cult around health. That how many times have we heard it? If you don't have your health, you don't have anything, right? We hear that all the time. I'm not saying that's not true, but like anything else, it can be carried too far. And if you use that, then people bludgeon you over the head with it. Or if you try to go after the healthcare system and say, there's got to be a better way to do this, or maybe the way we used to do it is better than what we're doing now, we should go back to something like that, or a modern version of that, then they pull this ace out of their sleeve and say, oh man, health is everything. We got to make sure, we got to do this. And they beat you up because you can't get the conversation. You can't get them to understand you're not saying healthcare would end. It's like saying, trains would stop if now train's not a good example. I'm trying to think, that hydro wouldn't flow if it wasn't the government running it.
Well, trains are a good example, because there is this notion that if the trains were owned and operated by the government, that if you transferred them over to the private sector, if the government wasn't running them, then the trains would stop running, or they would become so bloody expensive that people would not be able to use them anymore, or the private sector would not care about safety concerns or anything like that, so
right.
Everything would go to hell in a handbasket. And ironically, that was an argument that was made against privatization of the rail service in England under Thatcher.
Yeah.
And guess what? The sky didn't fall in.
No, of course not. And there's dozens of topics where that's true.
Here in Canada, when we privatized Air Canada, I remember the huge fights that were going on about that. We can't privatize Air Canada, because if we privatize Air Canada,
we won't have a national air carrier.
Well, we're not going to have any air carriers.
Well, as far as I checked, I drove by the airport yesterday, and I could have swore I saw an airplane with the Air Canada logo on the tail landing.
Right.
So obviously they're still there. Now, excuse me.
Okay. So,
but there is a situation that we can get into once we're through the bottom of the break here, which I know we're coming up on in a couple of minutes. This idea about Greyhound out west.
Yeah.
And it kind of dovetails nicely into what we're talking about.
It does. But before we get on to that, before we get into the break, because we have a couple of minutes here, just a couple of minutes, but I just want to point out, the whole argument, Nick, about, if religious institutions want to build a hospital, then let them build their hospital, okay? And, if it's... I don't think people appreciate the fact that it's not legal. It's illegal. Religious institutions, private institutions today in Canada, anywhere in Canada as far as I know, but certainly in Ontario, cannot build a hospital. You can't. You cannot get permission from the government to build and operate a hospital privately. And it's worse than that, okay? Let's say I have a lot of money and I want to go and I want to donate $10 million to the Civic Hospital in Ottawa, or to any hospital. And the condition is, what I'm doing is I'm donating that money in order to hire 10 doctors or 10 nurses or 10 technicians to run CAT scanners, okay? I can't do that. I can donate money to build a building or to, build a room, an operating room.
Right.
I could donate money to the hospital so that the hospital could build an operating room.
Right.
But only if the government gives the hospital permission to build that operating room. Why? Because the government regulates the people who are the doctors who are going to be performing surgery in that operating room. So even then, the fact is that it's not that religious institutions or people don't want to put money into this. It's that the rules prevent them from putting money into this.
Yeah, that's insane. It's because many of our finest hospitals are originally religious institutions.
Okay, let's just go for a quick break, and we'll pick this conversation up in a minute.
All right. Okay, welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. I'm Nick, he's Joseph, and we're having a pretty lively conversation about a host of things. We were talking a little bit about health care. We started off talking about the $6 million man and the way we kind of freely associate. Things have been drifting around a bit. And leading into the break, we were kind of hinting at the idea of, how hospitals originally got started. Most of them were religious institutions like the IODE, Hotel Dieu, the Shriners Hospital.
Hang on. Hotel Dieu, not Hotel Dieu.
I don't speak French. No
That's
disrespect
okay,
to my French friends, but you don't want me masticating.
I wasn't trying to impugn your integrity in any way, Nick. I just wanted to make sure that people knew what we were talking about.
Okay, because I don't want to masticate the name so badly they shudder in horror.
To say the least.
Yes. Anyway.
Okay. Well,
so
they are shuddering in horror.
Yes. Okay. But this leads to a very interesting question. And you and I talked a little bit about it over the break to try to just, get this straightened out in our heads. But the question becomes, okay, so Doug Ford has just done something amazing by forcing out. He didn't fire him, but let's face it, he created the climate that told Mayo Schmidt and the head of the Ontario Hydro One and his board that you're done here. Whether we fire you or you resign, one way or the other, you're done.
Right.
So
that's fair.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
So in this case, why doesn't he do something like you were talking about privatizing healthcare? Would the sky fall if we privatized healthcare? And I think the answer is obviously no. But why don't politicians do this? What stops them? Because right now, healthcare eats up over half of the provincial budget. So if we privatized it, we could pay off our debt. We could balance our books. There's billions of dollars in all kinds of other places that need money from the government to take, like infrastructure, and I'm talking about roads and bridges and highways.
Right.
Okay. And even rail systems that need money to go into.
Right.
So why? What's the big impediment to somebody proposing the idea that we privatize healthcare and let the private sector look after this?
Well, okay, first of all, let's be clear that when I talk about privatized healthcare, I'm talking about privatizing the delivery of healthcare. I'm not necessarily talking about privatizing the insurance side of things. I think that we could have a very good conversation. I don't know where I would come down on it, okay?
Okay.
I probably would be ultimately I'd probably be opposed to privatizing the insurance opposed to maintaining a public insurance program. But I just want to make it clear that when I talk about privatizing healthcare, I'm not talking about privatizing the insurance side of it. And so there still would be a cost to the public for the insurance. Now, ironically, this is what we used to have.
This is how it got started.
Well, OHIP, the Ontario Health Insurance Plan, was, even though it was a publicly owned and operated insurance program, it was an insurance program. And everybody had to pay, once they were 18 years old, to have health care in Ontario. They had to pay their insurance premiums. It's funny because a few months ago, I was having, my wife and I were out to dinner at a dinner party with some friends, and there, none of the people at the table even remembered that, and everybody at the table was older than me, and I'm mid-50s. Okay, so I mean, they were living and working in Ontario under that system, and they were arguing and saying, no, it was never like that. That's not the way it was. So, I mean, people have already forgotten, but absolutely, if you were a family, there were two levels of premiums. There was individual premiums, and then there was the family premium. And you got a bill every 3 months, and every 3 months you just sent a check in with a little piece of paper, card that you got from the government, and you were covered. And by the way, if you didn't pay that, you weren't covered by the insurance program. So if your insurance payments, even though it was public, if your insurance payments went into arrears, then your policy would lapse. And you would go to see a doctor, and that doctor would maybe bill OHIP directly, And OHIP would send a note back saying, sorry, they're not covered. And he'd call you up and say, you have to pay. So my doctor, I actually paid. I'd get a bill. So when I saw the doctor, I'd get a bill. And he would charge me a few dollars more than what OHIP would pay. So it wasn't a true deductible, but I'm just using the numbers off the top of my head. Let's say a doctor's visit was $50.
Right.
Or that OHIP would pay $50 for a doctor's visit, I might have to pay him $55.
Yeah.
So I'd pay him $55. I'd take the bill, and I'd send it into OHIP, and they'd reimburse me. So it was a true, even though it was publicly owned, it was a true insurance program. And people were not dying in the streets. The system was operating just fine. All of that changed under, I believe it was David Peterson, where they got rid of the premium side of things, and they went to a straight tax, and it was a business tax called the employer health tax. And it was 2%. It became a payroll tax. And I don't even know what it is now, to be honest with you. The whole thing has become such a dog's breakfast. I'm not sure how the tax and fees are. But we lived under the system, and it worked. Now, on the private delivery of services, you could do all of the public insurance the way I've just described it. People could be covered, or they could have their private insurance if they want. And they just go to the doctor or to the hospital, and the doctor or the hospital just charges whatever the charge is.
With all that
to the insurance policy.
So what is the danger then? Why do politicians, because I have my own theory about it, but why do politicians not stand up and say, look, we can really put a huge dent in how much it's costing us to run this monstrosity that Ontario Health has turned into, consuming over 50% of our annual budget and costing us billions? Why can he not stand up and make a logical argument that people could say, that makes sense, I'd like that? What's the problem?
Well, the first problem is that they get kicked out of office, and I know what you would think about that. I know what you think about that, Nick, and a lot of people, they go, oh well, politicians, all they care about is getting reelected. Okay, well, first of all, in politics, that's how you get things done. You get elected, you get reelected. Okay, and it takes an extraordinary amount of courage to say, I'm going to propose this, even though I know I'm not going to get elected. Okay, so there's that. Okay, but the reality is that we live in a democracy, and for better or for worse, the people don't want private health care. They're afraid of it. They think that it's a hobgoblin type of thing, and they're just not going to vote for it. And so this is the downside of democracy, if you want to call it that you get bad policy because people just simply, they want what they want, and they don't want to have to pay for it, or more appropriately, more accurately, they love to live under the illusion that they're not paying for it, or they don't mind not paying for it now and leaving the bill for their children and their grandchildren, great-grandchildren to pay, which is a problem that we have ongoing in this country as well. And you know where I stand on that from simply a moral point of view. But
certainly, look, I understand, and you would have the fight. This would be literally a world war with unions and with the NDP and with, all kinds of people who have a vested interest in the system as it exists today.
Well, we all have a vested interest, and you know what? Jobs are not going to disappear.
No, I get that, but
because it's run by the private sector.
But the point is, there's such the unions and the people in government hate the private sector because, let's face it, and I don't mean to paint with too broad a brush. There's some very good union shops. I run into them every day when I'm out there, doing what I do on a daily basis. And these guys are competent. They're very highly skilled. They do a great job. I'm not casting dispersions of the rank and file.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with unions.
Well, I do because...
I don't have a problem with unions. I have a problem with the law that forces people to join a union.
Okay, fine. And the fact that they can't have... that they're spending their union dues in places that union dues were never meant to be spent.
Right, exactly.
Okay. So what... But with the leadership, let me put it to you this way. The leadership of the union sees any move to privatization as a threat, even though in the private sector, of which I work in every day, there are all kinds of unions and all kinds of shops that do quite well. But you get and I know he's not the leader of the CAW anymore, but there were guys like Buzz Hargrove and Sid Ryan and people like that who would just, at the slightest mention of privatization, set the world on fire.
Right, but well, they're politicians themselves.
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt about it.
So they're going to use whatever violent rhetoric, extreme rhetoric that they can come up with in order to make the case to that any kind of privatization would be bad. And look, I disagree with them vehemently, but that's democracy. What bothers me about this debate, as with so many debates, and we've touched on this before, Nick, is that nobody's making the other argument. Nobody in the political arena is standing up and saying, there is an alternative, let's have a debate about it. And that bothers me more than anything else, because while I'm sitting here and I'm defending the democratic principle and saying that's democracy, that's the way it works, okay? But then, on the other hand, the whole idea of democracy is that there ought to be a competition of ideas.
Yeah, the arena of ideas, yep.
Okay, and so when conservatives, and here I go, I'm going to bash my fellow conservatives, and I'm not just talking about politically, because there are a lot of conservatives out there in this country, philosophically, who don't want to raise these and other issues as well because they're afraid of the backlash or being branded, okay? But if we're not going to make these arguments, then who is?
Yeah.
And in a way, because I hear this all the time from conservative politicians and policymakers and opinion leaders, etc., okay? They say, you know, we can't talk about that stuff because it'll just never happen. It'll never happen. We're going to look like fools. We're going to be marginalized. So we don't talk about that stuff. But they don't understand that the very reason that they appear to be extreme and they're marginalized and that nobody wants to talk about it is because they're not talking about it. So that mass of people in the middle who are just going about their daily lives and they're not really thinking about health care policy, and they're not really thinking about all of this other stuff, privatization, public ownership. They're just doing what they do. They go to work in the morning. They put in a hard day's work. They come home. They just want to relax. Maybe, you know, they have the kids to look after. They have busy lives. They don't care that much. As long as things seem to be working, then, okay, we're okay. We're fine with it. So, but let me just finish the point, okay? I know I'm rambling on a little bit or I'm dominating the conversation here, Nick. I don't mean to, but I just want to get this off, okay? The reason that that mass of people, when you first talk about some of these controversial issues, the reason that they perceive it to be extreme is because they haven't been hearing it.
Yeah.
But if you start talking about it, as a politician or as an opinion leader, and you talk about it as a serious issue and you push for these things, then all of a sudden it becomes a mainstream issue. Now there's a debate.
Well, a classic example of that is what we're seeing in the politically correct world from the left and the socialists and progressives about this whole transgender thing. 10 years ago, anybody mentioning this would have been viewed as extreme, as a wingnut, as a nutcase.
Yeah, you'll notice that the left never says, shush, we can't talk about that.
It seems to me the wilder it is, the more often they talk about it. And I guess I'm just underlining your point that, you know, we should adopt that philosophy of not worrying about what our opponents think of what we're going to bring to the table.
Well, you're absolutely right. And, you know, again, it's a shame. Pardon me. It's a shame that there are not, even outside of the political sphere, where you don't have to worry about getting elected or not, even outside of the political sphere. In this country, and I fear in many other countries as well, conservative-minded people, conservative-oriented people and organizations still generally don't talk about these issues in clear-cut, distinct ways, because they themselves are afraid of being branded. And that is really hard for me to understand and to accept.
Well, there's a classic case that underlines your point even further, and that is Tanya Granick-Allen. She was in the leadership race. She came in, well, she helped Doug Ford win. And mainly, everybody knew her as a pro-life candidate who cared about family values, very SoCon. And look at how far she moved the field markers with her campaign. Now the whole sex ed curriculum is being revisited. They're going back to what was in place before this. I think you and I have discussed the idea of just scrapping the whole curriculum altogether.
Well,
but the point is, this never would have happened, or certainly would not have happened the way it's unfolding now, if she had not brought those issues forward.
It's a great point you're making, and it's a good example of how you really can move the goalposts or move the chains, if you want to use the American football analogy, simply by sticking to your guns and fighting for what you believe in. And guess what? If you do that, you're going to find that there are a whole lot of people out there who believe in what you believe in, but they feel isolated and marginalized themselves because they don't see the leadership. And if you lead, people will follow on these issues. And you look, bottom line, you may end up not winning an election beat, but if you're going to lose, at least lose standing for something, okay?
Right.
As Margaret Thatcher used to say about Ted Heath, okay? Nobody likes a politician. Nobody wants to support a politician who has the courage of no convictions.
Amen to that. You know, it's funny because it reminded me of the very first time when I was driving truck in the States. A friend of mine came over to me, Ernie. He came to me and he said, "Have you heard, what do you think of Rush Limbaugh?" I said, "Who the heck? What a stupid name." Because it's not a name you run into every day. How many guys do you know are called Rush?
You know what? I don't even know if that's his real name.
It might be a stage name for all I know.
I don't know.
But beside the point, you just don't run into him, or you don't run into that name very often. I said, "Who the heck is this Rush guy?" He says, "Oh, you're going to love him. He thinks just like you do." So I got in the cab of my truck. I put on one of the local American station that's carrying a show, and it was like a breath of fresh air. Somebody was on a national platform, or an international platform, saying the very things that I believed in. And it was such a relief to know that I wasn't out here. And even in those days, I couldn't keep my mouth shut, you know. And for the next 8 years, while I was driving in the States, I listened to him every single day. I knew more about American politics than I did my own, which is a little embarrassing to admit. But it showed me that, you know what, somebody with some conviction and a little bit of knowledge can do a whole lot of damage to the other side if they're simply willing to stick to their guns on it.
Right. And just to finish up on the question of the Ontario sex ed curriculum, I think it's a great victory for parents in Ontario.
It is.
I would hope that the government is going to continue to support parents by looking at some of the legislation that was passed in the last couple of years of the Liberal mandate. And there's now is not the time to go into it, and we should spend some time talking about that, but just not tonight, maybe on a future show, okay? But I will say this, okay? What I am a bit disappointed about and regretful is that the people who were so active on that file focused so narrowly on the sex ed issue.
Yep.
And so my fear is that, on the sex ed stuff, they're going to go back to whatever it was, what year you mentioned, 1990, whatever.
I think it was 98.
Which I think is a very positive thing.
Yep.
And they're going to ignore the rest. So you're still going to have the global warming alarmism catastrophists that are going to be pushing their agenda. You're going to still have the whole area of
history.
Gay, straight, I think there's a whole wide range of things that really have to be dealt with on the education file and in the curriculum. And so much of the Ontario education curriculum, as is the case in many other jurisdictions, is really about ideological indoctrination and not really about educating the kids.
Amen to that.
So congratulations on to Tanya and for everybody else who's been involved in this. I think a job well done. But if I was going to be in any way critical, I would say there's a lesson to be learned here, and the lesson is that if you really push the issue, if you make it an issue, if you're not afraid to go out there and talk about it publicly, people will understand. And so, don't limit what you're paying attention to just the narrow. Talk about other issues, because there is so many things that we have to roll back in terms of where the government is going and where they're pushing society.
On that score, you're not going to get an argument out of me. And another great example is the work that Jordan Peterson's doing. He talks about a whole wide range of things, and he is pushing those goalposts or the chains down the field at an incredible pace.
Right, and I like Jordan Peterson. I've never met him, but I've listened to a number of his lectures that I can get on YouTube, and I don't know. There are certain aspects though that I don't like the fact that he'll say his issue is not with the corruption of language, and I'm not saying he doesn't have an issue with it, but that's not his real issue. His real issue is whether or not the government is forcing him to use language that he finds not appropriate.
Yeah,
and that's an important issue, but it's completely different from the principle of whether or not the language is being corrupted in the first place, irrespective of whether the government is forcing you to use language or not, because there are lots of ways that you could force people to use language. And I would say this, okay, in the English language, we actually have a neuter pronoun, a gender-free pronoun. It's called it, okay? And I don't find it particularly respectful to refer to people as it. I think that people are he, she, or they. They is a plural, not singular.
Right.
So I'm not going to use the pronoun they with anybody. Well, you're being offensive to me. And I'm going, well, no, I'm just speaking the Queen's English.
There you go. And for Mr. Peterson, that was his original argument, and he's made a lot of videos on that, but he's moved way beyond that now. He's got a whole series on a whole bunch of topics. But
right.
And I'm not a poster boy. I don't want to be seen as a poster boy.
And he's great, by the way. I recommend people go and watch him on YouTube. Absolutely, 100%.
He's not the only one. As a matter of fact, I'm looking at a lady right now who is a doctor, and I'm trying to find out what her name is. Let me bring up the YouTube here, and I'll tell you, it's from a... No. Yeah. Let me mute the sound. Anyway, I've got the video posted on YouTube. I just got to mute the sound here. There we go. And she goes on. She's the head of the Canadian Pediatric Society or something like that. Anyway, a very distinguished lady talks about issues that are very important. So there's a whole host of people now rising to the surface that people are listening to because Jordan Peterson prepared the ground. And now we're seeing that. It's like Rush Limbaugh in the States of talk radio.
Right, and it's just, there's an example of exactly what we've been talking about. That if you just, because there are people out there who are in leadership positions in their businesses, in their industries, in their communities, who know better. They know, okay, what's going on. And they're afraid to talk about it. They don't want to be marginalized. They don't want to be labeled as an extremist or anything like that. So they get afraid. And I get it. But here's the beauty, okay? Here's the good news. The good news is that if you actually go out and talk this way, there are going to be people that are going to call you names, but you're going to find that there are going to be a whole lot more people who are going to give you a pat on the back and go, right on, I agree with you.
Yep. And that's where I think we need to start building on and stop being afraid of our own shadows.
Afraid of our own shadows. Only the shadow knows.
Yeah, well, it's that was... Never mind. I'm not going down memory lane again.
We love going down memory lane. What are you talking about?
Only the shadow knows?
Well, no, that was... I'm afraid, Nick, that was... Well, if it was before my time, it was before your time. It was
one of those old classic radio shows. I listened to
you can still get those. I don't know if you can get them on YouTube.
Oh, probably.
Probably can.
The Shadow.
Yeah.
The Green Hornet.
The Green
Lantern.
The Green Lantern I've heard about, but I don't remember. Well, the Green Hornet I remember, the television show anyway.
Yeah.
Who played Kato on the Green Hornet?
I have no idea.
Yeah, see, you know who it was. You just don't. I mean, you'll know.
You're not thinking Jackie Chan.
No. This is way before Jackie Chan.
That's what I thought.
No. Kato on the Green Hornet.
Yeah,
was Bruce Lee.
That was the next name on the tip of my tongue.
Bruce,
I didn't dare
Bruce
say
Lee.
because I was afraid
Yeah,
of
it was
being wrong.
people. That's how he got his start in Hollywood, and then he came up with this idea for a really interesting television series about an American somehow or other that ended up being raised in China.
Yeah.
In a whatever the temple is.
Yeah.
Who ends up getting in trouble in China and comes back to the United States, and he's wandering around, etc. And the name of that TV show
You
was
got to be kidding.
Kung Fu.
Oh man.
David
Carradine.
And after coming up with the concept, etc., and selling it to the whatever the network was, they turned around and they hired David Carradine to play the starring role instead of Bruce Lee, and it was his show, it was his idea, and they totally cut him out of it. And the irony of all of that was that David Carradine wasn't Chinese; he had no Chinese background or anything like that. And
he was a martial artist, but he wasn't Chinese.
Was he a martial artist?
I believe so.
Yeah, and of course David Carradine died recently, and we are not going to discuss the circumstances.
I don't know anything about it, and I would probably prefer not to know.
I think you are wise. Anyone out there that wants to understand the circumstances of David,
you can Google it yourself.
Google it yourself, but it's X-rated.
It isn't pretty.
Enough said about that.
That's right.
Okay, so we're gonna take a break in a minute here, but when we come back, we've got a couple of things. I still want to do that clip of the polling.
Yes.
From Yes Prime Minister. And
we have stupid politician to get
to.
And we have shopping Canadian to get to.
We've got so many things. We're never going to get through the list of things, Nick.
Well, I that's one of the reasons I like to post more than what I think we're going to get to. There's property rights, man versus frog, NATO. We already talked about did we talk about the rental car?
The rail car?
Rental.
Oh, the rental car. No, we didn't talk about that yet.
Yeah, so that'd be fun.
You did mention at the beginning of the of the show, but so we're going to try to get to all of these things.
Don't talk about Greyhound yet either.
Yeah, the Greyhound. There's so many good subjects out there to talk about. Okay, so we're going to take another break here, and we'll be go out and relax and do whatever you have to do, stretch your legs, and then come back and settle in. We've got another hour of great conversation. Okay, you are back in the combat zone with Joseph and Nick. And, for those of you who don't actually know it, it's Joseph Bennemy and Nick Vandergraat. Nick Vandergraat, the Dutchman, or the ethnic Dutchman, I should say. Is that a terrible thing to say, Nick, that I pointed out? Some people are going to go, oh, he's anti-Dutch.
No, because I remember the famous motto of all Dutchmen. Wooden shoes, wooden head, and wouldn't listen. And you can tell a Dutchman, but you can't tell him much.
Okay, now I just want to make sure that everybody understands, because now we're going to get flooded with complaints. Okay? And so that was Nick, and Nick's allowed to make fun of Dutchman because he's Dutch.
Half Dutch.
Okay, so...
And what isn't Dutch is Irish or French.
Okay. All right. And Nick, you have a public service announcement to make.
Yes, I do. I got this note from Tom. I don't know whether it's legitimate or not, but I'm going to pass it along because under the category of better safe than sorry. He says there are pics going around of Trump having a stroke. Do not open. It will wipe out all information in your phone and computer. Thanks, Tom, for the warning. I'll make sure that not to open anything that has an attachment like that with it. And I suggest the rest of you do the same because, your personal information, it's such a pain when that kind of stuff happens, so you don't want to expose yourself unnecessarily.
Okay. Okay, we all know what that means. It's stupid politician time.
Favorite segment.
It's your favorite segment. Okay, Nick, I hate to do this because I don't want to seem like I'm piling on. And especially after last week when I spent so much time defending him you were on his case and you were making your... but how can we not give our Stupid Politician of the Week award to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau?
Now, before you play the clip, I want you, for all of those you listening now or when you listen later on podcast, listen to this and then ask yourself the obvious question at the end. I'm not even going to suggest to you what that question is. We'll wait till the end because I'll ask it on your behalf so we can discuss it. But there's an obvious question to this clip when it's over. Go ahead.
Okay, so just to set this up, this is Justin Trudeau. It's not him speaking. It first sounds like him, but it's a reporter asking a question. He's being scrummed. It's a press availability or whatever. So here we go. It's about 3 minutes long, 3.5 minutes long. So just bear with it. It is interesting.
You have had a zero-tolerance policy when it comes to allegations of sexual misconduct within your party. There are serious allegations against you right now. Why not call an independent investigation and put this story to rest?
Obviously, this is a situation that has been very much on my mind over the past few weeks. It's a issue that I have been deeply engaged with, not just as a leader, but all my life since my early 20s in university, active on issues around sexual assault and behaviors. I've been reflecting very carefully on what I remember from that incident almost 20 years ago. And again, I am confident that I did not act inappropriately. But part of this awakening that we're having as a society, a long-awaited realization, is that it's not just one side of the story that matters, that the same interactions could be experienced very differently from one person to the next. And I am not going to speak for the woman in question. I would never presume to speak for her. But I know that there is an awful lot of reflection to be had as we move forward as a society on how people perceive different interactions. Like I said, I do not feel that I acted inappropriately in any way, but I respect the fact that someone else might have experienced that differently. And this is part of the reflections that we have to go through.
Mr. Prime Minister, the question was, why not call an independent investigation if there are questions? And she says that you apologized to her.
Again, I've been reflecting on the actual interaction, and if I apologized later, then it would be because I sensed that she was not entirely comfortable with the interaction we had. Like I said, I've been working very hard to try and piece it together, and even when the original editorial came out at the time, I was fairly confident. I was very confident that I hadn't acted in a way that I felt was in any way inappropriate. But like I said, part of the lesson that we all have to learn through this is respecting that the same interactions can be felt very differently by different people going through them, and we have to respect that. And that's exactly what we're having to come to grips with as a society, and it's certainly something I'm continuing to reflect on.
So do you apologize
I
now?
apologized in the moment. I certainly feel that if again, I don't want to speak for her. I don't want to presume how she feels now. I haven't reached out to her. No one on my team has reached out to her, and we don't think that would be appropriate at all. So I'm responsible for my side of the interaction, which certainly, as I said, I don't feel was in any way untoward. But at the same time, this lesson that we are learning in, and I'll be blunt about it, often a man experiences an interaction as being benign or not inappropriate, and a woman, particularly in a professional context, can experience it differently, and we have to respect that and reflect on that.
Okay. So the question is, what did he say? What did he say that had anything to do with the original question?
See, I know people are listening to that and they're scratching their heads going, I don't get it. This doesn't sound like as funny as Justin can be from time to time. Like, we're not talking about his socks. This isn't the people kind comment, okay? But I had to grab that soundbite because it was more than a soundbite. It was more like a mouthful, because
indigestion
it is the classic example of political obfuscating gobbledygook.
Doublespeak, yep.
It's not even doublespeak. And look, if you think you did something wrong, or even if you don't think you did, here's the thing, okay? I don't think I did something wrong, but she did. I apologized. There it is. That's the end of the story. Why do you go on and on and on and on and on talking about how I've been reflecting deeply on the deeply on what? I've reflected deeply on what I don't think I did wrong. It doesn't make any sense. And you know, I'm waiting to hear the reporters who are gathered around, you know, at this scrum. I'm waiting to hear them laugh, but they're not. So this is about as bad as an example of how you handle a question if you're a politician. You know, I hate to say it, like as though I'm defending him, and I did. I defended him last week, as you know. So it's just beyond me.
Well, the part that blows my mind. First of all, there's two elements to this. First of all, his if there's a more nebulous answer, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, nebulous is exactly the right word to use.
He just throws so much matter into the air that you forget what the heck you asked him, which is a page out of his dad's book, by the way. He had a motto: never answer the question you were asked, answer the one you'd wish you were asked.
Well, that's a politician's trick.
That's right.
Already.
That's right.
So,
and he has done that here in spades. But the other thing...
Well, hang on a second. No, he hasn't. He hasn't answered the question he wants to answer. He hasn't given any answer, and I don't even know, after listening to that clip, what the darn question was.
He said, why don't you just call the question was, why don't you call an inquiry? And then he went into this long baffle-gab for 3.5 minutes where he never came anywhere near answering it.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Nick.
But the point, the other point is, nobody, because the event took place, it's been confirmed. But the one thing we don't know, and because, first of all, in order to make a judgment on this, and I didn't pick up on this last week, but I'll tell you something, I think it was you made the point earlier, we don't even know what he's alleged to have done. Like, did he smack her on the butt? You know, did he give her breast a squeeze? Did he grab her on the thigh? What was the nature of the act? Until we know that, you know, like, and she's not going to come forward and say anything. She's done as much talking about it as she wants to do, and I'm not sure that I blame her. But keep this in mind: when this took place, he was a teacher. This is 20 years ago. He was a teacher, so there's that element. There's so many threads to this that the press could take and run with.
Okay,
and
but
they get this.
But you know, now we're getting dragged into the substance of the debate about whether or not he did something, and I can't let the occasion pass without making the observation that whoever this reporter was, he himself, this reporter, framed it as a kind of a gotcha question. Okay, because he already talked about how, you know, there've been serious allegations. I don't even know what the allegation is, let alone serious. So you're right about that. But you know, I don't know how anybody could keep a straight face with that answer.
I couldn't either. So
you didn't have to, because you removed your headphones, Nick.
Oh, I couldn't take it. Like, I've listened to that clip twice. I couldn't take a third time. We got about 30 seconds in it, and I tossed my headphones aside. I said, I cannot listen to this a third time.
Okay.
Because I knew what, you know, look, it's one thing to, you know, to step on a nail once. maybe twice, but I'm not going to do it a third time. That was just too painful.
Okay, so there it is, ladies and gentlemen.
Stupid
politicians for... What's the date today? Today's the 11th? July
No,
11th?
it is the 11th. You're right, July 11th.
Sometimes we come across as being totally clueless, Nick.
Yeah, I know. We only
Notice
care
I said
about
we, not you, right?
Well, I'm glad you included me in that. I wouldn't want you to feel alone.
Yeah, we're going to have to do stupid podcast hosts.
Oh, God, we'll win the award every week.
Okay. Okay, I cut Nick off there, but that's because we've had enough of this.
That's right.
No more stupid politicians for this week.
I want to go back to the chat room. Carmen made a great point. I need to put my extra eyeballs on to read it because old men like me can't read too well, even when they can see. Anyway, she's talking about healthcare. She says, let me blow this up a little bit so I can see it better. Okay. I don't know who was in power at the time, but it was decided to limit the amount of money a doctor could make. You know, we don't want doctors making $1 million of taxpayers' money per year, so they limited the doctors to a limited amount of operating room time. That's where the long wait time started. The ORs should be open 24 hours per day, 3 shifts. More doctors who are surgeons could help more patients get better. Wouldn't it be nice to mess up your knee and have it fixed within a month? Wouldn't it be nice to get surgery within a month, like the old days? Carmen, you nailed it. Thank you very much for that comment. I appreciate it.
Yeah, totally 100%. But you know that's just not going to happen unless we have private delivery of healthcare services.
Yeah, I agree. But she's bang on. She's absolutely right.
Yeah, and I know Carmen, you're talking. I don't know whether you support private healthcare or not, but remember that all of the problems that we have come under greater and greater regulation of our healthcare system in order to try to get the costs under control. Okay,
now speaking of costs under control and stupid politicians, you've got to be in your bonnet for this NATO situation with our Prime Minister being overseas in Latvia and making announcements about Latvia and Iraq and how we're going to be extending the mission in, was it Iraq?
Well, the mission has been extended in Latvia.
Okay, I wasn't sure which one it was.
People don't know that we actually have combat troops in Latvia deterring the Russians in
Canadian beavers holding back the Russian bear.
That's right. Because the Russians are deadly afraid of.
They should be.
I don't even know how many troops we have there. We don't have that
500,
many.
I think.
500?
One of them is a very good friend of mine.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dwayne Desmond from Petawawa.
Can you say people's name?
I just did.
You just did. Okay, so anyway, and yes, and we are going to be doing some stuff in Iraq as well. So, and we just started a mission in Mali as well.
Yeah, that's...
So we're doing these things, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do them. It's an interesting debate. But as we learned today, the amount of money that we're spending in defense in 2018 is going to be, I believe, 1.26 billion. Sorry, no, 1.26% of GDP, which is down from Sorry, I've got those numbers wrong. 1.23% of GDP, which is down from 1.36% of GDP in 2017. Now, Nick, I understand, as you do, that defense spending goes up and down on a yearly basis, depending on how the spending is structured and what the particular program is and how much money has to be put into it. So I'm not really that concerned about the fact that it's gone up or down or anything like that. But I think it's just an example of because our target, our commitment, is to be spending 2% of GDP on defense. Now, people out there are going to go, well, why do we have to spend that kind of money? There are peaceniks, there are all kinds of... I get that, okay? But the fact is that we've made that commitment, and more than that is that the United States, that we keep on dumping on, is spending far more than that, not on American defense, but on American defense and Canadian defense and European defense.
On the Western world defense.
Western world defense. And it's so upsetting to me. I can't tell you how upsetting it is to me when I hear us talking about being, a sovereign nation, etc. And all of that true, 100%. But we don't look after our own defenses. We don't spend the money that we should be spending in order to defend ourselves, and we rely on the Americans to do it for us. And I just think that's wrong. And what's really got me going here is because on the break, or when we were listening to Stupid Politicians clip, I was just looking at a story that was tweeted to me about Justin Trudeau's comments in a speech at
NATO.
the NATO conference that he's at, where he's talking about talking about what Canada's doing. And he made a particularly ignorant comment. And I'm quoting here, a lot of people talk about the 2%, because this is an ongoing issue today in particular, right? A lot of people talk about the 2%. But announcing inputs isn't nearly as important as demonstrating outputs. Now, Nick, somebody thought really carefully about how to phrase that. It's a nice sounding kind of, I don't really, but it doesn't mean anything.
I mean, that was my question. What the hell does that mean?
But B, when it comes to military operations, when it comes to putting Canadian soldiers in harm's way, the outputs are directly related to the inputs.
Of course.
So you can't, how do you even quantify outputs? We're not going to keep our commitment of 2% GDP in defense spending, but we're going to have what? Our output is going to be somewhere the equivalent of 2% GDP. I'm going to tell you something historically. There's a great example of this, and that is in the 1930s when it became clear that Nazi Germany was rearming, and Winston Churchill and his small band of followers in Parliament were warning the British, the government, that this was a problem. They had to do something. They were pushing for it. And the area that they were that had the greatest concern for them, that they kept on raising over and over and over again, was the strength of the British Air Force. And the British government under Stanley Baldwin, who was the Prime Minister at the time, promised that under no circumstances would the British air power become equal to or inferior to the power of, I believe it was, any two combined European powers. Anyway, so this was a numbers game. And then, lo and behold, the Germans announced, and it was corroborated, that they had reached parity with the British Air Force, which was the Prime Minister had promised that this wouldn't happen. So what was the reaction of the British government at that time? What was their response to this? Their response to this was to say, well, we don't want to talk about quantity. Let's talk about quality. The quality of our planes and our airmen is so much superior to the Germans that even though they may have the same number or more pilots and fighter planes, it's not really parity. And this is the kind of obfuscation that gets us into trouble all the time. It's a way of dodging the issue. And so, this comment it's beyond stupid.
Well, that kind of mentality damn near lost them the war.
Yeah, and we're not talking here about an imminent war or anything like that. But
that's the kind of consequences it can lead to.
It can, but it's an indication, I think, of the unseriousness of politicians these days. Because this is not limited to Justin Trudeau. This is the kind of thing that you see from politicians across the political spectrum. It's very discouraging, and just rather than just tackling the issue and telling people straight up. Look, here's the thing. If you don't want to spend 2% of GDP on military spending, on defense, then tell people that. Tell people that you don't want to. I think 1% is fine. I know that my predecessors in previous parliaments have set a goal of 2%, but I think that 1% is fine. Go out and tell the people. It's the same thing that we were saying in reverse.
Right.
In the last half hour before, we were talking about, conservatives going out and talking about issues like why not privatize health care, right? Okay, well, if you're on the left, why not just say 1%? People are going to vote for him for that,
There's
So why do you have to lie about it?
Yeah.
Why do you have to obfuscate?
Well, let me take this whole scenario about this attitude about NATO, because that's a sore point with our biggest trading partner. So I'm going to switch the angle a little bit on this, and because everything you said makes sense. Okay, about this whole idea, just tell people what you want to do and live with the consequences. Too many people are afraid of doing that. But here's the thing. This is a very, very poor time to start talking that way when you consider the fact that we are now in a trade war with our largest trading partner and the largest economy in the world. As you pointed out earlier, living next to the Americans is like having a mouse with a stick. Or with a
right, and we're the mouse.
And
we're the mouse with a toothpick,
and they're the elephant,
and they're
with
the elephant
baseball club.
with a baseball club. Although they don't even need a baseball club.
Bat,
Let's face facts.
Baseball bat. Anyway, the point
Baseball
I'm
bat.
making is
That's right.
If you're in the middle of this trade dispute with your best customer, and there are irritants within that trade dispute, wouldn't it be smart to come out and say and actually show? Because you're right about the up and down, the hills and valleys. Like if you go out and buy, let's say, 100 aircraft in a year, frontline combat aircraft, that's going to drive your defense spending up. And the next year you don't have to buy them, so it's going to come down. I get that. I understand that. But if you could say to Mr. Trump, if you're Trudeau, say, look, we hear you on the 2%. Here's our blueprint for how we're going to work towards that, to kind of ease the tension on that front, to make the negotiations with trade even easier, because things don't happen in vacuums. And if you could, I don't want to say appease him, but show him that we're willing to start pulling our own weight in this area, maybe he'd cut us some slack on trade.
Maybe. And this is the whole thing about, look, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. I think that in some areas he's doing a great job. In other areas, I don't like his style. I find it irritating. I find it annoying, and just not very becoming the president of the United States. I don't find Donald Trump very presidential, and I think that I really do think that's a problem. Yep. Okay, but set all of that aside for a second. If you take a step back or two steps back, and you look at things objectively, you do understand, number one, he has an obligation. He's elected by Americans to look after the interests of the United States. So stop whining and complaining. You can't have your cake and eat it. You want to be independent and sovereign, and you don't want to be pushed around, and you don't want to be dictated to by the Americans. 100%, I get that. Okay, so then stop expecting them. Stop whining and complaining when they treat you like an adult and they say, okay, we're going to have a real trade negotiation, and I'm not interested in looking after your interests, Canada. I get paid to look after American interests. You get paid to look after Canadian interests. So that's point number one. Point number two is they are a colossus compared to us. So the way you deal with them is you deal with them, honestly, from a point of weakness. I hate to say it because we don't want to admit it, okay? But let's have a little bit more wisdom. We're not going to get into a pissing contest with the United States on trade or anything else and win. It may be good politics, but look, you've got to deal with the real world the way it really is. And the way the real world is in this case is that you're not going to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump in the United States of America in the ring on trade. So have a different approach. Have a different strategy. Stop poking people in the eye. I don't think poking people in the eye is the right way to approach these disputes in the first place.
Right.
But when you're the mouse and he's the elephant, I think it's more than just wrong. It's
and if you think that elephants are afraid of mice, you don't know much about elephants.
Yeah, it's a myth. Yeah, elephants really are not afraid of mice.
Not in the least.
Here's the thing about elephants and mice. They don't notice them.
That's right.
And they especially don't notice when they've stepped on them.
Right. They might look at their foot a little later and say, "Oh, look."
It's not like having a pebble in your shoe.
Right. It's that the pachyderm beats the mouse every time.
Yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to mention that and get into that because this is another classic example of how, on one hand, he is crass. He is certainly he's not a statesman in a Winston Churchillian kind of way, or even in a Stephen Harper kind of way. Stephen Harper's 4 or 5 times a statesman than Trump is. I mean, and I'm not trying to be a Stephen Harper's fan. I'm just comparing the two on the world stage. And if you had to pick who you want for a statesman, Stephen Harper wins hands down. But he is the leader of the biggest, most powerful nation on the earth, and we need to accept that fact and stop bitching about it.
Okay, that half hour went fast.
It sure did.
Okay, it went slow when we were listening to Justin, but
we speeded it up on hurry.
Okay, so we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
All right.
You are back in the combat zone. This is the 4th half hour. We're heading into the home stretch now, and I wanted to start off this segment. I promised a couple of weeks ago that we would play you a clip from a British television series called Yes, Prime Minister, or Yes, Minister. There's the same series, but it was a progression. Yes, Prime Minister came after. It was a sequel to Yes, Minister, or a continuation. And for those of you who have not seen any of this, you can get a lot of these clips on YouTube, and you could probably purchase a copy of the series on DVD on Amazon or whatever. I don't really know. But anyway, just to set this up, the Prime Minister has decided that he wants to reintroduce national service, which is a kind of conscription in England, because there has been a poll that says that this is going to be popular. So where we're going to pick this up is a discussion between his press secretary or his communications director and the head of the public service in England, Sir Humphrey Appleby, talking about this issue and polls. So here we go.
He's going to say something new and radical in the broadcast.
What, that silly grand design? Bernard, that was precisely what you had to avoid. How did this come about? I shall need a very good explanation.
Well, he's very keen on it.
What's that got to do with it? Things don't happen just because prime ministers are very keen on them. Neville Chamberlain was very keen on peace.
Yes, he thinks it's a vote winner.
Ah, that's more serious. Sit down. What makes him think that?
Well, the party have had an opinion poll done. It seems all the voters are in favour of bringing back national service.
Well, have another opinion poll done showing the voters are against bringing back national service.
Well, we can't be for it and against.
Of course they can, Bernard. Have you ever been surveyed?
Yes. Well, not me, actually. My house. Oh, I see what you mean.
Well, Bernard, you know what happens. A nice young lady comes up to you. Obviously, you want to create a good impression. You don't want to look a fool, do you? No. So she starts asking you some questions. Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the number of young people without jobs?
Yes.
Are you worried about the rise in crime among teenagers?
Yes.
Do you think there's a lack of discipline in our comprehensive schools?
Yes.
Do you think young people welcome some authority and leadership in their lives?
Yes.
Do you think they respond to a challenge?
Yes.
Would you be in favour of reintroducing national service?
Yes. Oh, well, I suppose I might.
Yes or no?
Yes.
Of course you would, Bernard. After all you've told you can't say no to that. So, they don't mention the first 5 questions and they publish the last one.
Is that really what they do?
Well, not the reputable ones, no, but there aren't many of those. So, alternatively, the young lady can get the opposite result.
How?
Mr. Woolley, are you worried about the danger of war?
Yes.
Are you worried about the growth of armaments?
Yes.
Do you think there's a danger in giving young people guns and teaching them how to kill?
Yes.
Do you think it's wrong to force people to take up arms against their will?
Yes.
Would you oppose the reintroduction of national service?
Yes.
There you are, you see, Bernard. The perfect balanced sample. So, we just commissioned our own survey for the Ministry of Defence. See to it, Bernard.
Okay. That's a great series, Nick. I know we've talked about it, but the funny thing is when people watch Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister, they think it's all just comedy, but the reality is it's really, in many respects, the way government works, especially the kind of government that we have under the Westminster system. So we like to joke around that Yes Minister was not a comedy. It was actually a documentary.
Actually, the best line in that whole skit was Neville Chamberlain was for peace.
Yeah,
that's the best line of the whole thing.
It really was. Anyway, it's a brilliant series. If you get a chance to catch some of it on YouTube and just short clips, or pick it up, I'm sure you must be able to order a DVD set from somewhere. It's a really brilliant series.
Watch it online.
You can probably watch it. I know they're on YouTube. You can get a lot of the episodes actually on YouTube.
Yep.
So there are probably other places as well.
I'm sure.
And Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister. And just one other point about this, that the writers, when they were doing the writing for this, okay, they actually were having secret meetings with senior members of the government who were going out to lunch with them and saying, they were always looking for story ideas.
Right.
And so these senior bureaucrats and senior politicians and staffers and stuff like that would meet with them for a drink, quietly away from, because nobody wanted to be known that they were leaking information, right?
Right.
But they were actually getting a lot of their story ideas from
the government,
from people in the government. So it wasn't even that they were making these things up. A lot of what they were actually incorporating into their episodes was based on actual events. And there's an interesting one. I don't remember the name of the title of it, but it's talking. They go to Saudi Arabia. I think it was Saudi Arabia.
That's funny.
For meetings,
right.
And of course you can't have alcohol, right? So they're in this reception, and they've got this plan where every few minutes when they want to drink, someone comes from the communications office that they've insisted that they have to be in constant touch with London. So they set up a communications room outside of the reception, and every few minutes somebody comes out with a message from the communications room saying to the Prime Minister, Mr. Johnny Walker needs to speak with you, right? And the reason I say that is because that scenario actually happened.
Oh my God!
That was based on an actual thing that someone had done in the government when they were in.
I thought you were going to talk about the hospital that had 400 staff and no patients.
400, yeah, it's brilliant. It's a great. I remember that one as well.
Oh my God!
Anyway, there you go. I promised that I'd do that. That's in all seriousness, it's a good indication of how you can get the kind of results that you want from the polls that you do and how you ask the questions, etc. And it's in politics. One of the things that politicians do is they use polls not to figure out what public opinion is, but they use polls to shape public opinion. So bear that in mind next time you hear of a particular poll result.
Yeah, that's true. And there's a few polling companies out there who do it right. Well, they take a whole bunch of polls, blend them together, and come up with a result. That's harder to rig, I think, than the other way. But I don't doubt that there are some pretty shady pollsters out there. They do a lot of push polling and things like that. Anyway, to get back to a more serious topic, for those of you who remember my on-air time when I was on the terrestrial radio station, I spent probably the best part of 2 years telling people about private property rights and about land grant patents and about how important property rights are.
And there's a story, I think it's in the Globe. I've got it here somewhere. Where did it go? Here it is. Yeah, it's in the Globe. And it comes out of Montreal. And it's about a court decision where the judge says that it doesn't matter whether it's on private property or not. They have to set aside 500 acres to protect this tiny little frog. It's an inch long and barely weigh. I don't even know how much a gram is.
Okay, now, people should know this because they're going to be measuring their marijuana in grams.
Well, you're allowed to carry 30 grams, right?
I don't know what the limit is. I think you're right, 30 grams. Anyway.
So they'd have 30 frogs in their pocket.
Well, it sounds like a lot because the frogs are an inch long.
Right.
But let's just say that a gram is somewhere around the weight of a paperclip.
Okay, fair enough.
It's not a lot of
We're talking
weight.
about a very tiny amphibian.
It's a very small frog, yes.
The point I'm making...
You might be mistaking it for a big cricket or maybe a grasshopper.
Something like that.
Right.
And they have decided that this animal, this amphibian, is more important than building homes for people. And all the environmentalists are going crazy, thinking, oh, this is a great day, this is a great day. But what they don't understand is that private property rights are fundamental to a democracy. And that without private property rights, you don't really have any rights at all. Because other than, everybody talks about the right to the freedom of the press and the free speech and all these are all hugely important. But if I could draw a table and put 4 pillars under it, 4 legs under it, you'd have the right to life, the right to free speech, the right to property, and the right to I forget what the 4th one is now. Assembly. There's 4 of them. The 3rd one, the last one, is escaping me, but are absolutely what everything else rests on. Oh, the freedom to worship as you choose. So these 4 are what the democracy rests on. Every time we cut a leg off, the table gets more wobbly.
Yeah, Nick, and let's not give the judge a pass here, okay?
No, not at all.
Okay,
I'm about to crucify him.
Okay, because
pardon the phrase.
I think he mentioned. I'm going by memory here, but I think he referred to the important societal good that is going to be derived by saving these frogs. And in this one spot, by the way, we're not talking about saving the frogs. We're saving the frogs in this spot. So the frogs might be living in other spots. I don't know. By the way, just hang on a second. Let's just do this because we're talking about the judge now. Just before we hang on, let's set it up properly.
Okay, go ahead.
In Canada's criminal justice system, there are 2 separate but equally important branches: the police and crown attorneys who investigate crimes and prosecute offenders, and the judges who let them off the hook. These are their stories.
Oh, that's brilliant.
I know we're not talking about criminal court here, but, I think what the judge is doing is a crime. I was just waiting to use that. That's been sitting here for months, and I couldn't figure out when we're going to use it. We have to do this law and disorder section. This would have been a good topic for it.
Absolutely.
Anyway, sorry.
Okay, here's the quote from the.
I'm trying to be serious, but I can't take.
No,
I can't take saving these frogs for the sake of society seriously.
Okay, well let me set this up because these 2 paragraphs will tell you what the judge said and also set the table so you understand his logic. In laying out the reasons for his decision, Justice LeBlanc said the courts have not hesitated to recognize that human responsibility for the protection of the environment is a fundamental societal value and that criminal law must be able to adapt accordingly. That responsibility does not stop with the prevention of the release of toxic substances into lands, waters, he wrote. It also nowadays to counter because it impoverishes the environment, the loss of biodiversity from human activity. If that's his logic, then we can't turn over a blade of. We can't take a spade and plant a tree because we might kill an earthworm in the process.
Well, great point. And I'm just wondering, because it's the springtime. Well, it's the summertime now, but a lot of people around here in the springtime, they have a little problem called ants in their kitchen. So, I mean, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to not get rid of the ants in my kitchen? because I have to protect the biodiversity in my home. And what about mice in the fall, or spiders for that matter? I mean, spiders in the fall is a serious problem in some places, okay? It is here. So we have, I'm not saying we're infested, but we have spider and mice. We have mice. Every year we have mice. And that's just the way it is. So I guess, what's next? Are we going to outlaw mouse traps? I mean, really, if we're going to save the frogs, and remember, we're not saving the frogs writ large, we're saving the frogs in this particular place. They could go across the street. And, if I was the owner of this property, I would be very happy to invite the judge and the rest of the officials from the court to come and collect the frogs and take them across the street. Or better yet, how about bringing the frogs to their house?
Yes, absolutely. But fundamentally, though, this is a direct attack against the ability for people to use, enjoy, profit from, and even dispose of private property without undue interference by the state.
Right.
Nobody's talking about setting up a sulfur plant next to a school. Nobody's talking about, putting in a potash mine. Nobody's talking about putting up a refinery. We're talking 500 acres here. And this is going to be home for 1,200 residences, of which if you put 4 people in each one, you're talking almost 5,000 people.
This is the same thing as that darn killdeer a couple of weeks ago here in Ottawa.
It's exactly the same
Going to
logic.
come to a screeching halt because there's a nest with eggs in it. And, look, just move the nest, which ultimately is what they did. Okay, so we didn't have to go through all of the bureaucratic, mumble jumble and calisthenics, etc. I don't get it. Okay, look, these guys are articulating a principle, and so are you. You're talking about the importance and the sanctity of private property, and you're absolutely right. Everything flows from private property and free speech. Those are the two things.
Yeah.
And nothing else matters in a free society.
If you don't have those.
Because if you don't have those, then you don't have a free society. Or you won't have a free society.
What happens when you impose regulations like this, or you crush private property rights like this, here's what happens.
But the point I'm making here is that this judge is articulating a ridiculous, unenforceable principle, because if, as he's saying, this is an important societal principle or good for frogs, then all joking aside, it has to be an equally important principle to save crickets and grasshoppers.
And
here's the question I'm going to ask, okay? Honestly, joking aside, I know it sounds funny, but all joking aside, Nick, how do you even cut your grass without killing life forms? Not plants, but insects.
Mosquitoes, insects, you name it. But there's another element to this that I think is just as important. In effect, what's happened here is we've had land expropriated without compensation, because now he can't do with it what he wanted to do. So when the government,
Precisely.
If a government comes in, let's say on my farm, and they want to put a highway through, or build a hospital, or a defense establishment, something they say is critical to the state, and
I can guarantee you it won't be a defense establishment under this government, though.
No, fair enough. There was one, Foymont, not far from where I live. They've closed it now. But the point I'm making is, if they decided that something that was for the greater good, I hate the sound of that term, but for the good of the country, had to go, and the only suitable place to put it was on my property, then fine. I understand that. Pay me fair market value for my property, and I will move. But if you think you're going to take my land without paying me for it, and just throw me off it, or make it impossible to use through regulation, which is what's happening to this guy.
That happens all over the place with designated wetlands, etc.
Exactly.
Right.
There's things called, what do they call them now? Areas of scientific interest. The acronym's escaping me, but they'll take a wellhead, and they'll say you can't work the land within so many feet of the wellhead. Then you can only do this much. In other words, they make it impossible to work within 200 feet of this wellhead. So you just took this huge circle out of the middle of this guy's farm. Or if you find a loggerhead shrike in your hayfield, you got to shut the whole hayfield down. Well, how's a farmer supposed to feed his cattle over the winter? That's what the hay's for. So what happens is when they do that, the individual in question, it's not always farmers, but when the landowner in question finds something on the land that he knows that if it gets discovered is going to destroy his livelihood, he's got two choices to make. He can either report it and suffer the consequences, or he can do what they call shoot, shovel, and shut up, which is exactly contrary to what they're trying to do in the first place. Now, if your livelihood's at stake, and I don't mean you, I'm talking about the royal you, what would you do? You find a bird that's endangered on your property? Are you going to let bird watchers come on and find it and go, oh, my God, we found a yellow-bellied tree tick flycatcher? All of a sudden.
Yellow-bellied sapsucker.
Yeah, well, I don't know that they're endangered. But the point is, if I find one,
they should
dead.
Be.
Yeah. You know, if that was... a lot of people will say, if I find one like that, he's dead. I'll dig a little hole, and that'll be the end of it, and my lifestyle is not in jeopardy. So this is actually counterproductive.
Right. It's like driving people underground. It's like driving.
That's
a market
exactly
underground.
what it does. It's like a black market. It's the same kind of thing.
It's exactly
as a
the
black
same
market.
principle.
Yep.
Yeah, and here to add insult to injury. So what's happening is the government steps in, and they declare portions of your property to be, let's say, a wetland. So you're no longer allowed to use that property. And then they continue to tax it as if you are using that. They don't reduce your taxes.
No, of course not.
No, it's a scam.
Oh, completely.
And you know what? I don't advocate revolutions, but governments have been overthrown for this kind of thing in past years.
Well, wasn't there a revolution, something about over taxation without representation? Led to a tea party somewhere. I think the town was Boston.
Yeah. Not just. Let me tell you, man. Not just the American Revolution.
I'm just using that as an
example. The whole notion of no taxation without representation is fundamental to parliamentary democracy.
It has to be
100%.
Yep. So that's why I couldn't agree with you more about this story. I think it's an outrage. And they are going to appeal it, and I think they've got solid ground to appeal it because...
I don't know these days.
Well, okay.
Listen, I think they're right. I think they're right. I just don't know if they're right in law.
Well, because this is the first time it's ever been used in that sense, and there's all the case history is against them on this. So the judge is obviously an activist judge, and is whatever. So I wish them all the best on this.
I understand what you're saying, but I have to tell you, I have so little faith in the court system these days, and I hate to be accused of bringing the administration of justice into ill repute. Okay, but let's not beat around the bush. I mean, there are. Well, look here, two cases in point. Okay, and I know we're running out of time here, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. But two cases in point. The first was in 2015, just a few years ago, legalizing or striking down as unconstitutional the laws against assisted suicide. Okay? Well, that case that the Supreme Court ruled on was actually already adjudicated, precisely the same case, in 1992 in the Sue Rodriguez
Supreme
case.
Court.
Okay? So this was already decided. Now, you can make a different ruling if there's some kind of a material change in circumstances. The law has changed, okay, or the situation that whatever they were doing was changed. But what the Supreme Court did was it ignored all of the precedents that were there already, and just went ahead and made a completely new ruling. And the argument was, we can make a ruling like this because public opinion has changed around it. Now, maybe it hasn't, maybe it hasn't. I'm not going to get into that debate. But the fact is that the place that you're going to deal with public opinion ought to be the Parliament, the legislative branch, not the government. And more recently, with the Trinity West University. Okay,
yeah, no kidding.
Where the court ruled that the BC Law Society didn't have to accredit, if they didn't want to, Trinity Western University Law School because of the code of conduct that the Trinity Western asked their students to sign. That precise case was already adjudicated with respect to the BC College of Teachers. And the Supreme Court had ruled that the BC College of Teachers could not deny accreditation and licensing, accreditation of the School of Education, or the Teachers College at Trinity Western, and they had to license the teachers, the graduates that were coming out. So the point I'm making here is that these guys don't respect. There are so many judges right now that don't respect precedent. And ironically, the judges that we've just referred to in both the case at the Supreme Court in Canada, with the case of Trinity Western University, and prior to that, the
Teachers College in BC.
euthanasia case, in 2015, most of those judges were appointed by the Conservative government, by Stephen Harper. This is a Stephen Harper Supreme Court in Canada, which is a different subject altogether. We didn't even get into the Supreme Court issue in the United States, but it just goes to show you it's and this is, again, as conservatives, we should be up in arms over this kind of stuff, but there it is.
There it is, and that's the show.
That is almost the show, right? What do we do when we want to close this down? What do we want to do? We want to tell people to send us emails, right?
Yes, we do.
Comments at thecombatzone.ca. That's comments.
We want them go ahead, finish the address.
Comments at thecombatzone.ca.
Yep.
And
we want them to tell their friends and share the links and listen to the podcast and help us spread the word. The show is growing every week, folks, so be part of the growing trend to make this the best talk radio, online talk radio station from a conservative point of view in the country.
Okay, thanks a lot. This was a great show this week, Nick, and we look forward to having you in the Combat Zone next week, guys.